The property manager saw a woman in worn jeans and a faded canvas jacket and decided she wasn't worth his time. He saw a single mother. He saw someone who needed him more than he needed her. He saw an easy dismissal. What Craig Ellsworth did not see was the service ribbons she had earned in Kandahar. He did not see the calluses on her hands from rope climbs and weapons drills at 5 in the morning in -30 weather. He did not see the letter in her jacket pocket, signed by the Chief of the Defense Staff, commending her leadership under fire during Operation Attention. He did not see any of that because Craig Ellsworth had already decided what she was the moment she walked through his door. He thought he was dealing with a problem tenant. He was about to learn he had walked into a wall. This is the story of how a property manager in Burlington, Ontario humiliated a retired Canadian Armed Forces warrant officer in front of her daughter, her neighbours, and eventually the entire country, and the price that arrogance cost him to the last dollar. The morning corporal, retired, Nadia Osei-Mensah arrived at Ridgemont Property Management's main office. The temperature outside was sitting at -11 with the wind chill pushing it closer to -18. She had driven 40 minutes from her apartment on the east side of the city in a 2009 Honda Civic with a heater that worked inconsistently and a rear window that fogged no matter what she did. She was 51 years old. She had a slight limp from a training injury in 2019 that had never fully healed. She was wearing the canvas jacket because it was the warmest thing she owned that didn't make her look like she was heading to a bush camp. Warrant Officer Nadia Osei-Mensah. She had earned the rank in 2000 and held it for 7 years before medical release, had served 22 years with the Royal Canadian Regiment. She had done 2 tours in Afghanistan. She had trained soldiers at CFB Petawawa. She had been awarded the Meritorious Service Medal for her role coordinating a ground evacuation of 14 personnel under mortar fire in Kandahar province in 2010. She had come home to a country that thanked her at hockey games and then forgot about her by Monday. After her release, she had worked in logistics for a trucking company for 4 years, raised her daughter largely alone, and eventually found herself in a rent-controlled apartment on Brant Street that had a slow leak under the kitchen sink and a heating issue in the second bedroom that the building management had been promising to fix since October. It was now February. She was not there to cause trouble. She had called 3 times. She had emailed twice. She had documented the issue with photos and a written maintenance request submitted through the tenant portal. She was there because she had run out of channels that didn't require her to stand in front of someone and make herself impossible to ignore. Craig Ellsworth was the regional manager for Ridgemont Properties, responsible for 11 residential buildings across Hamilton and Burlington. He was 44. He had a firm handshake, a photograph of himself with a city councillor on the wall behind his desk, and the kind of confidence that came from never having been seriously wrong about anything in a way that cost him personally. He ran his buildings like a small kingdom. He was not unkind to every tenant. He was unkind to specific ones, the ones he had already decided weren't going to push back. He was on the phone when Nadia entered the office. His assistant, a young woman named Priya, looked up immediately and offered a professional smile. Nadia gave her name and the unit number. Priya was already pulling the file when Ellsworth came off the phone, glanced through the glass partition, and walked out to the front desk himself. He looked her over once, the jacket, the limp, the file folder she was holding with both hands. "Mrs. Osei-Mensah," he said, mispronouncing the surname confidently without asking for the correction. "Warrant Officer Osei-Mensah," she said. Her voice was level, not aggressive, precise. He blinked. "Right, you're here about the heating unit." "I'm here because it's -11 outside and the second bedroom in my unit has been sitting at 14 degrees since October the 3rd. My daughter sleeps in that room. She has her winter coat on inside our apartment." Ellsworth nodded in the way that managers nod when they have already decided the answer before the sentence is finished. "We've had our technician out twice. The reports indicate the heating is within acceptable variance." "The acceptable variance under the Residential Tenancies Act is 21 degrees. I have a thermometer reading from this morning. It was 14.2. He looked at the folder. He did not reach for it. "Look," he said, and the word landed with a small, deliberate weight, the kind of word men like him used when they wanted to sound reasonable while saying nothing. "These are older buildings. There are limitations. We're doing our best with the infrastructure we have. I can put in another service request." "You put in a service request in November. No one came." "These things take time." "My daughter is 17. She does her homework in her winter coat." Ellsworth crossed his arms, not aggressively, just finished. "I'll flag it again. Is there anything else?" There was a beat of silence. Nadia held it with the patience of someone who had learned how to wait in conditions Craig Ellsworth could not have imagined. "I'd like the service request documented in writing, with a timeline," she said. "And I'd like you to acknowledge that the current temperature is a violation of provincial housing standards." Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the particular irritation of a man who felt that a conversation had lasted longer than he had budgeted for it. "I'm not going to sign anything acknowledging a violation," he said, dropping the management voice entirely. "You're a tenant, not a lawyer. I don't know where you got that language, but if you'd like to escalate, the number for the landlord and tenant board is on our website." Nadia looked at him for a moment. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move. She simply held the eye contact of a woman who had faced things Craig Ellsworth would not have been able to articulate to himself in his worst nightmares. "Thank you," she said. "I have what I need." She turned and walked out. Priya at her desk did not look up, but she had stopped typing the moment the word violation was spoken, and she had not started again. What Craig Ellsworth did not know as he walked back into his office and poured himself a coffee was that Nadia Osei-Mensah had recorded the entire conversation on her phone, legally, as was her right under Ontario law. He did not know that she had already consulted a paralegal who specialized in tenant rights. He did not know that her daughter, Kwame Osei-Mensah, 17, quietly brilliant, furious on behalf of her mother, had been documenting the temperature readings in a shared spreadsheet every morning since November, and had uploaded the complete dataset to a Google Drive folder she had titled, without irony, Evidence. He did not know that Nadia had a brother, Sergeant Major Emmanuel Osei-Mensah, currently serving at CFB Kingston, who happened to be close personal friends with a veterans advocacy journalist at the Toronto Star, who had been looking for the right story for 6 months. He had no idea about any of it. He was thinking about the planning meeting he had at 2 o'clock. The next 30 days moved quietly. Nadia filed with the landlord and tenant board. She submitted her documentation, the photos, the temperature logs, the maintenance requests with timestamps, the recording of the February meeting. She contacted the Burlington branch of Veterans Affairs. She called her brother. Emmanuel called his contact at the Star. The heating in her apartment was still not fixed. On March the 4th, a Tuesday, a technician finally appeared. Not from Ridgemont, but from a third-party company the building had subcontracted. He was in the unit for 20 minutes. He told Nadia quietly that the issue was a block damper in the ductwork that would have taken an hour to fix in October. He did not say this in writing, but he said it. The hearing before the landlord and tenant board was scheduled for March the 21st. By March the 16th, the Toronto Star story had already been filed and was sitting in an editor's queue. It ran on the 17th, a Saturday, which meant it caught the weekend readership. The headline was measured. Burlington veteran says property manager ignored heating complaints through coldest months of winter. The sub-headline was not. Warrant officer spent 4 months asking for help. Company said temperatures were within variance. The article included Nadia's photograph, taken with her permission in her service uniform, standing in front of a thermometer in her daughter's bedroom that read 14 degrees. It included Quam's spreadsheet, presented as an infographic. It included the recording, not a transcript, the actual audio posted to the Star's website with Craig Ellsworth's voice saying, clearly, "You're a tenant, not a lawyer." By Sunday morning, the article had been shared 40,000 times. By Sunday evening, it was trending on X under the hashtag Warrant Officer Winter. CBC Radio picked it up by 7 a.m. Monday. By 9, it was on Power and Politics. Craig Ellsworth's phone began ringing at 8:15 Monday morning and did not meaningfully stop for 6 days. Ridgemont Properties issued a statement that afternoon. It was 4 paragraphs of careful language about their commitment to tenant welfare and their deep respect for the service of Canada's veterans. It did not mention Craig Ellsworth by name. It did not apologize. Communications professionals will tell you that omission is not always protective. This was one of those times. By Wednesday, the Ridgemont corporate office in Toronto had received over 2,000 emails. Their Google rating dropped from 4.1 to 2.3 in 96 hours. 2 current tenants in their Hamilton buildings gave on-camera interviews to a local CTV affiliate. One of them had the same heating issue. The other had a mold problem that had been reported 7 months prior. The story had legs because it was not just about a heating unit. It was about something people recognized. It was about the particular cruelty of being dismissed before you finish your sentence. The comment sections of every platform where the story ran were full of people who had experienced the exact same tone. "You're a tenant, not a lawyer." People heard it and heard their own version of it. From a supervisor, from a bank manager, from a doctor's receptionist. Nadia Osei-Mensah had said it out loud so cleanly that it became everyone's story. Craig Ellsworth arrived at the landlord and tenant board hearing on March the 21st in a suit and with a company lawyer. Nadia arrived, with her paralegal, her daughter and her brother Emmanuel, who was in uniform. The adjudicator, a woman named Patricia Waugh, had reviewed the documentation in advance. The hearing was procedural. The temperature logs were entered into evidence. The maintenance records, or the absence of them, were entered. The recording was entered. Ridgemont's lawyer argued that the issue had been addressed in good faith, and that the variance, while acknowledged, had been within manageable parameters given seasonal delays. Patricia Waugh listened to this without expression. The ruling came 12 days later, in writing. Ridgemont Properties was found to have breached their obligations under the Residential Tenancies Act. They were ordered to complete all outstanding maintenance on the unit within 14 days. They were ordered to pay Nadia a rent abatement of 4 months, approximately $3,800, in recognition of the reduced habitability of the unit during the period of non-compliance. They were assessed a fine for procedural failure to respond to a formal maintenance request within the statutory timeframe. It was not a dramatic number. It was not a career-ending figure on its own, but it was the legal record, and the legal record was now public. 2 days after the ruling was published, Craig Ellsworth was called into a meeting with Ridgemont's Vice President of Operations. He was not fired that day. What happened was more precise. He was informed that his contract, which was up for renewal in June, would not be renewed. He was told this was a business decision. He was given a handshake and a standard severance package, and a reference letter that said he had performed his role with diligence. No one mentioned Nadia Osei-Mensah. No one had to. He cleaned out his desk on a Thursday afternoon. No one made a scene. His assistant Priya said goodbye, with the professional courtesy of someone who had watched him make the February choice and had remembered it. He walked to his car. The photograph of himself with the city councillor was in a box on the back seat. The parking lot was empty. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time before he started the engine. On April the 3rd, Nadia and Kwame drove to IKEA and bought a small desk lamp for Kwame's bedroom. It was a practical purchase. The room was warm enough now. The damper had been fixed on March the 26th, precisely within the 14-day order, and Kwame wanted better light for her university application essays. She was applying to McGill for environmental science. Her personal statement was 3 pages, single-spaced, and it was about climate data and the ethics of ignoring evidence when the evidence is inconvenient. Her mother read it at the kitchen table one evening and did not say anything for a full minute after finishing. "That's good," Nadia said finally. "That's really good." Emmanuel visited on the long weekend in April. He brought groceries and a bottle of wine, and they sat on the small balcony, which technically wasn't large enough for 3 chairs, but they made it work. He said he had heard from his contact at the Star that the article had been cited in a private briefing to the Ontario Housing Minister's office. He wasn't sure anything would come of it. Probably nothing would, in the immediate sense. "Didn't do it for the minister," Nadia said. "No," Emmanuel said, "but it got there anyway." There is something worth saying about what happened in that office on a February morning in Burlington, Ontario. Craig Ellsworth looked at a woman with a limp and a canvas jacket and a file folder, and decided, in the 5 seconds it takes a person to decide, that she was not worth the full weight of his attention. He had made that calculation hundreds of times in his career, and it had never cost him anything before. That is how those calculations become habits. What he failed to account for, what men like him consistently fail to account for, is that the person in front of them has a life that extends well beyond what is visible in a ground-floor office on a cold Tuesday morning. Nadia Osei-Mensah had coordinated an evacuation under mortar fire. She had raised a daughter who built spreadsheets of evidence at 17 years old because she had watched her mother approach every problem with documentation instead of anger. She had a brother who knew a journalist. She had 22 years of learning how to hold a line. She did not raise her voice once, she did not threaten, she did not cry. She simply collected what she needed and she used it methodically and completely. Craig Ellsworth thought he was protecting his company from an inconvenient tenant. He was signing his own professional death certificate, in his own voice, on her phone. The lesson is not that you should be kind to people, only because they might turn out to be important. The lesson is older and less comfortable than that. The lesson is that the woman in the worn jacket who speaks to you precisely and holds eye contact and does not flinch, that woman already knows something you don't. And you have a choice, in the 5 seconds you have, about what kind of person you want to be when she finds out you know it too. If this story stayed with you, if you recognize something in it, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Voices of Courage for more stories about the people who hold the line without raising their voice. Leave a comment below. Do you think the system worked the way it should have? Or did Nadia have to fight too hard for something that should have been automatic? We read every response. I keep thinking about that 5-second window. The one Craig Ellsworth had when Nadia Osei-Mensah walked through his door. Jacket worn at the elbows, folder in both hands, limp she's carried since 2019. And he made a decision about who she was before she finished saying her name. 5 seconds. That's all it took for him to choose the version of himself that cost him everything. What strikes me most about this story isn't the hearing or the Star article or the recording. It's Kwame. A 17-year-old girl, watching her mother get dismissed over and over through October and November and December, and responding by opening a spreadsheet. Not by getting loud, not by posting something angry, by building a case, row by row, temperature reading by temperature reading, date stamped every single morning before school. She learned that from somewhere. She learned it from watching Nadia approach every problem the same way, with documentation instead of fury, with patience instead of performance. That's not a small thing to pass on to a kid, it's actually everything. I think about integrity a lot, not as a concept, but as a daily practice that doesn't stop being hard just because you've already done it 1,000 times. Nadia had every reason to walk into that office swinging. She had the record, she had the photos, she had the law on her side, and she walked in calm, precise, professional, not because she didn't feel the frustration of it, but because she understood that the way you conduct yourself under pressure is the actual measure of who you are, not what happens to you, how you carry it. And then there's the intelligence she brought to it, not credentials, though she had those. I mean the kind of clear-eyed thinking that says, I have a right to this repair. I know what the legislation says. I know what constitutes a violation. I know how to document. I know who to call. That kind of clarity isn't accidental. It's built over years of solving problems in conditions where half measures get people killed. Nadia spent 22 years learning to think precisely under pressure, and she brought that same rigor to a 14-degree bedroom in Burlington. The system worked in the end because she worked it. Fully, without shortcuts, without gaps Ellsworth's lawyer could slip through. What I keep coming back to is this: Craig Ellsworth was not a rare kind of person. He was a common kind of person having a common kind of bad morning and making a decision that felt routine to him. That's the part that's harder to sit with than his arrogance. The arrogance was almost beside the point. The real problem was that he had made that same assessment. This person in front of me does not require my full attention, many times before, and nothing had happened. Until Nadia. She didn't go looking for a fight. She went looking for heat in her daughter's bedroom. What she found, by the end of it, was that the tools to protect yourself exist. The legislation, the board, the documentation, the legal record. And the only thing standing between you and using them is whether you have the patience to learn them and the steadiness to apply them without flinching when someone tells you you're out of your lane. Nadia had both, she always had. I don't think Craig Ellsworth will make the same mistake again. I also think he understands now that the woman in the worn jacket who speaks to you precisely and doesn't raise her voice is not a woman without power. She's a woman who already knows she doesn't need to raise it.